Ontario's capital city wants to grow its economy while building infrastructure for a rapidly growing population. And though that has proved to be a daunting task, the president and CEO of the Toronto Region Board of Trade thinks there are lessons for her city in what China has done. Jan De Silva joins us now for more. Welcome back.
Thanks, Steve.
Nice
Great
to have you here again. Now, you were with the mayor. You were with the mayor of Toronto on his mission, I guess, early part of April to Asia. Let's start with transit. What did you see about what they were doing on public transit that really impressed you?
Well, I guess they're dealing with population growth or urban population growth on the same scale or even greater scale than we are in Toronto Region. And they have a capacity to get things done on a much faster scale than us against the backdrop of master planning for their cities. And the other piece that's very interesting, even if you step outside of the mainland China into Hong Kong and other markets in Asia, how they're funding this without always being an allocation out of taxes.
Let me go to the first one first. People are going to say, of course they can get stuff done faster. It's an authoritarian dictatorship, and therefore, if you don't have to take the niceties of democracy into account, of course you get things done faster. Not the case?
Well, it's a single-party government system. It doesn't mean within the party that there's not discussions that go on. But if you look at one of the cities we were in, Chongqing, China, population of over 31 million, more than the population of Canada. And we had 4 city councillors, the mayor, and a business delegation with us. And the councillors were even saying, you wouldn't even know you're in a city of 31 million. In fact, traffic was moving better than it does in our region. So lessons to be learned around the need for master planning and the active use of transportation to get people and goods moving around.
What do they have that we don't have that makes a city of 31 million not feel like that?
Well, it's their train system, it's their subway system, it's a gondola system that they've got in the territory. One of the councillors took a picture of this bridge that had been built in 18 months.
I got it.
Wonderful.
Sheldon, we happen to have, this is Councillor Shelley Carroll, I assume, who tweeted this picture. She was on the trip with you. That is a beautiful bridge. Now, apparently that bridge was built in 13 months. It's got 10 lanes of road, 10 lanes, and a subway line as well. How did they get that done so quickly?
Again, a master plan and then the ability to move forward quickly. It did trigger some discussion about how long it would have taken to do a feasibility study around doing the feasibility of something like that. So I think one of the lessons that we learned from this is that we need to think about how we can compress the planning cycle for getting things done, because there's strong awareness in the region of the need for transit. It's just we need to find a way of getting a master plan in place that's endorsed and then getting on with things.
But my hunch is they don't spend a lot of time getting public input. They don't spend a lot of time worrying too much about environmental protection. Again, you tell me if I'm wrong here, they probably don't worry so much about how many people die on the job if they've got to build that thing. I mean, that's all fair comment, isn't it?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think, in fact, I'm going to pivot out of China. Not that I wouldn't be happy to talk about that, but I think the more important message, if we look at Hong Kong and the MTR system, which is their subway system, it's viewed as the most successful model of its type in the world. Moves 5 million people a day through that system. 10% of their revenues come from fares, from the actual fares of people using their train service, their subway service. 90% comes from really smart use of the land, the real estate on which those trains operate. And that's a really good way of funding expanded lines and the maintenance of lines without having to charge really high fares to the users and or looking at making yourself uncompetitive with higher taxes.
Now, was all that done before Hong Kong went back to...
It was in 1967 they did a study. It was still under British rule. The first lines were opened in 1979. MTR went public in 2000. 24% of the shares of MTR are publicly floated in Hong Kong. It's the most widely held stock in the territory. But because of that continuing relationship with the government, it means that the allocation of land to make for a very efficient funding model is easily supported, because the government's as much of a beneficiary of smart utilization of land as are the users of the system.
But this is a privately owned and privately operated public transit system. Is that right?
The operating system is privately owned. Privately listed, 24% is, and 76% is still owned by the Hong Kong government.
Oh, I see. Could we do that here? Do we have people with enough money to do that here?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely we do. And I think the difference, if you look at 10% coming from fares, there's a myriad of restaurants and retail in the subway stations in Hong Kong. And then the air rights, where we have one-story street-level entrance to TTC stops, they do condominium or shopping malls around that, which creates other sources of rental income. So the issue for us is how do we make smart use of assets available to us to fund this transit need that we have in the region?
That's a good question. What's the answer?
The answer is we need more of these experience practices out that are happening internationally as a best practice. I'd say no one in North America is looking at the model that MTR has. If you look at New York, it's got far more subway track than Hong Kong has, but it's running funding deficits as well in terms of just the maintenance of that and the expansion of that.
But just thinking about how we do it, I mean, right in front of the studio, I guess in a few years' time, we're going to see the Eglinton Crosstown. That's publicly funded, right? I mean, they've gone to the markets to get the money, but it's publicly funded. The private sector's building it. The public sector is going to operate it.
Yeah.
Is that the wrong model for us?
I think the lesson learned here is to go back and say, how do we maximize the land, the city land, the taxpayer land that's allocated to these developments? How do we make sure that we take advantage of the air rights from a funding perspective, from retail as other sources of revenue, so that we can keep fares low and competitive and that we can build out at the rate that we need to support?
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit here. Also, while you were in China, you guys, you signed an agreement with a company called the Greenland Group?
We did. Have you heard of Greenland?
I have heard of Greenland. The Greenland Group is new to me.
Greenland Group, let me spend a minute on it. This is a U.S. $100 billion company, headquartered out of Shanghai, operating around the world. It builds some of the most iconic green skyscrapers, and they're working on a big project in Toronto at the moment, King Blue. It's a condo development, a very iconic combination of condos, commercial, and a theater museum connected with a heritage site. So that's quite interesting. What they do, they have a tremendous amount of property development in China, and in these property developments, they also operate international grocery stores. By that, these are grocery stores that carry products that are imported from around the world, because China's middle class is looking for higher quality products, better protein, and a better safety reputation that comes from some of these international brands. They've signed an MOU with us.
Memorandum of Understanding.
Memorandum of Understanding, correct. Because they're going to be setting up a Canadian Purchase Center in Toronto for the purpose of networking through our grocery and food and beverage manufacturers to be able to buy in Canada, and then they'll handle all the importation, the certification, and the retailing in China. So a very great way to get our food and beverage sector totally connected into China.
They want our food.
They want our food.
What do they want our food for?
Well, because Canada has an outstanding reputation for quality, for safety, for cleanliness. And if you look at some of the scandals that have taken place in the past in China, baby formula being contaminated and other things, people just don't trust the safety practices around some of the manufacturing in China. While it's improving, the reality is people are willing to pay a premium for something with authentic quality attached to it. And we have that. And let me tell you, we want to get in there. We took a look. We went to visit, some of the councillors and I went to visit one of their international grocery stores in Shanghai. Fabulous. I mean, fabulous on a scale that would rival some of our best grocery stores here. But way too much Australia-based product on the shelves. There's a lot the Canadian product could be disrupting away from Australia. A great country, but I think we've got great products as well. So that's what the purchasing center is about. It's a very easy way for Canadian food and beverage manufacturers to access China without the complexity of having to figure out how to navigate that market.
I don't want to be a killjoy here.
Please don't.
Too late, I'm going to be. You know, I mean, we did have a listeriosis crisis here not that long ago. We did have a case of mad cow maybe 10, 13 years ago, something like that. So we're not perfect, right?
We're not perfect, but you know what? We responded very well. I think that the case that you're talking about, I mean, Maple Leaf won awards for how effectively they managed that, and quite frankly, we're not afraid to stand up and say we've got to take responsibility and let's fix it, and that's part of what goes with our reputation. So, just to give you, let me give you a quick fact around why we should be excited about this. Australia started a free trade agreement with China January of this year. Prior to that, in the past decade, they've gone from $1 billion to $9 billion of food and beverage and agribusiness trade with China. We're hardly there at all, and there's a huge pent-up demand for what we have to offer. So we're very excited about the purchasing center as a really good tool for getting more of our business taking advantage of growth markets.
For me, anyway, it does beg a bit of a question, in as much as, yes, we have a decent reputation around the world for made in Canada. I mean, that's a decent brand name. However, a lot of the stuff that we make comes from other places around the world. You know, we get the raw materials and the other ingredients. Probably some of the processed food comes from other places in the world. And then I guess something happens to it here and it goes out as made in Canada. So is this more marketing than real?
Oh, no, it's absolutely real. We've got fabulous agribusiness. If we look at some of the technology around Guelph, there's wonderful work being done on the future of food and how to improve output. Those are technologies that can be effectively deployed in some of these growth markets. And our other products, a lot of the inputs are coming from Canada, so they are indeed made in Canada.
Okay. Your Toronto Region Board of Trade recently launched its Trade Accelerator Program. What is that?
That is what we're going to do to get at least 1,200 companies in the region active in export. It's a very practical, hands-on, 90-day process. It's invitation only. Companies have to be nominated by some of our key sponsors, but it gives them a 2-day kind of classroom experience of everything they need to do to think about going global. They then have a very hands-on market development process that they take back into their companies. And let me tell you, we started in November. We've probably had about 80 companies go through. We're just ramping this up. We've had some great success stories already. A company out of Scarborough called Fine Cotton came into our program in November. Since then, they've increased their sales by $250,000 a quarter through increasing exports into the U.S. They've got an export manager there, and they've just launched a European distribution agreement. They're crediting this program at making them understand how to navigate markets and understand where the support was for them. So stay tuned. We want more of our companies here active in these growth markets.
I thought our people export all the time. It's just that we basically only export to the United States.
Well, U.S. is an important opportunity and a close partner for us, but we're on the cusp of having more trade agreements, free trade agreements, than any other country in the G7. We're close to having Europe on track, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, possibly a China free trade agreement. And for those trade agreements to truly benefit our economy, we've got to be activating trade. So programs like TAP are going to be working very closely with markets like Europe to say, which are the companies here that would benefit most, and how do we get them engaged in taking advantage of it?
Jan, I got to tell you, one of the things I've never understood, we have a capital city of the province of Ontario. You know, they speak 200 languages in the Toronto School Board. We've got people from all over the world, and yet it feels like 90% of our businesses just want to sell to the States. How do we get our businesses to sort of see a bigger picture and want to export beyond the U.S.?
Well, let me tell you, I spent 15 years living in Asia before I came here, and I used to ask that question a lot. The smaller European countries were there in droves. Australia was all over Asia. Where was Canada? And what the Australians and the Europeans would explain to me is that in the absence of other partners like the U.S. right at our border, you have to go external. We've had the luxury of having a very important trading partner with the U.S. That's not going to go away. That's a huge geographic advantage to us, an economic advantage. We've got NAFTA, which is making, you know, all of North America viable. We now just need to say that there are different growth markets than just these mature markets of North and South America for us. So.
I mean, I think the second biggest Italian-speaking city in the world is Toronto, behind Milan.
Wouldn't surprise me. But you know,
and yet, how much business are we doing with Italy? Probably not that much.
Possibly not, a lot more that we can be doing. But let me tell you, if we talk about food in China, we're absolutely capitalizing the diversity of this marketplace. We're a really good test bed for products for around the world because we've got, you know, authentic citizens here who can really road test us for us.
All right, well, let's finish up on this. If we really hit the ground running on this stuff the way you want us to,
sure.
Any sense about how many jobs that could create here, what kind of economic activity it represents? Potential growth, all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, for every, Conference Board of Canada did some research a couple of years ago. For every $100 million of new exports, that's 1,000 jobs at home. Our Trade Accelerator Program, TAP, is hoping to generate $500 million, 500 million of new exports, so that's 5,000 jobs that would be attached to that, and that's all elements of the supply chain. If we can really get some of these programs like the Canadian Purchasing Centre with Greenland going, that's a whole other level of engagement. I mean, I think our big opportunity right now is to help our businesses pursue growth, which is great for employment at home.
Gotcha. That's Jan De Silva, Toronto Region Board of Trade. Thanks so much for coming into TVO tonight.
Thanks, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.